I still remember the scent of jasmine, the glittering lights, and the thunderous applause as my sister walked down the aisle, draped in a custom-made designer lehenga worth more than my annual salary. My parents stood at the center of it all, beaming with pride like royalty. My father, who rarely ever showed emotion, actually cried that day. Not quiet tears, real ones. He held her hand tightly as he walked her to the stage, whispering something that made her laugh through her veil. And me? I was seated in the third row, behind distant cousins I hadn't seen in years. No one even noticed I was there. Everything about the wedding screamed excess. Imported orchids flown in just for the table centerpieces. A 6-tiered cake none of us even tasted. A fireworks display that lit up the sky like a national celebration. All paid for by my parents without a second thought. I watched as they hugged guests, posed for pictures, toasted glasses, and received compliments about their beautiful family. People kept saying, "You must be so proud," and I wanted to scream, "Of whom exactly?" When it was time for the couple's first dance, the spotlight dimmed and followed them onto the floor. I remember staring at my sister smile, flawless, rehearsed, adored. And then I glanced at my parents, who looked at her like she was the sun itself. I didn't exist in that glow. Nobody asked me to come up. Nobody pulled me in for photos. I wasn't the bridesmaid or the sister of the bride or the emotional daughter. I was just there. An extra, a witness to a celebration that told me, loud and clear, who mattered and who didn't. Later that night, when we got back home, I heard my mom on the phone telling someone, "We really went all out for this one. She deserves it. She's always been our little princess." And in that moment, I knew exactly where I stood in this family. On the sidelines applauding someone else's spotlight with no intention of ever being allowed my own. Growing up, I used to think love was something you earned. So I tried. I brought home perfect report cards, stayed out of trouble, helped around the house, and always made sure my shoes were lined up neatly at the door, because my sister never did. She was loud, messy, wild, but she sparkled. And for some reason, everyone loved to sparkle more than stability. At every family gathering, it was the same story. "Look how pretty she is. She's so lively. She'll marry rich. Just wait." Meanwhile, I was introduced as the other one. Quiet, mature, practical. Words that sound like compliments, but feel like apologies. I built my life from scratch. Paid my way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, skipped vacations to save money, and carved out a small but successful career. I didn't complain. I didn't expect handouts. I just thought, when my time came, maybe they'd finally see me. Maybe they'd say, "We're proud of you too." So when I got engaged, I let myself hope. Just a little. I brought it up gently one afternoon, sitting across from my parents at the kitchen table. "We're thinking of a small wedding," I said, smiling. "But I'd love your support." My mom barely looked up from her tea. "You're smart, honey," she said with a smirk. "Go earn it yourself." She laughed as if it were a compliment, as if self-sufficiency were a prize I'd begged to win. My father, sitting beside her, just nodded like a man who'd heard something reasonable. I blinked, stunned. There was no question, no hesitation. They hadn't even asked about the date or the venue. Just nothing. And that's when it really hit me. All those years I spent thinking love was earned. It wasn't. At least, not in this house. In this house, love was gifted to the one who glittered and rationed for the one who built her own shine. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized I could spend a lifetime chasing their approval and still be the second daughter, the one who always came after, always gave more, and always got less. But not anymore. I started cutting corners the day after that conversation with my parents. Every dollar became precious. No more takeout coffee. No more Uber rides. No more spontaneous dinners with friends. I made spreadsheets, clipped coupons, and picked up extra shifts like my life depended on it, because in a way it did. Planning a wedding isn't just expensive. It's emotional. Every decision feels heavier when you're carrying it alone. My fiancé, Daniel, offered to take care of more than half the costs. But I didn't want to start our life with a one-sided burden. I wanted us to walk into marriage as equals, not with me dragging shame behind me like a train on a gown I couldn't afford. Meanwhile, my sister, Maya, was living her version of a fairy tale. After the wedding, which looked like something off a Pinterest board, She and her husband moved into a fully furnished condo, gifted by my parents as a starting point. Every month, they sent her money for groceries. When she got bored with her job, she quit. My mom called it finding herself. My dad said she's still adjusting. Daniel noticed, of course. He didn't say anything for a while. But one night, after watching Maya unwrap yet another expensive just because gift from our parents, he turned to me and asked, "Are you okay with all this?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to pretend I was used to it, but something cracked open inside me. "No," I said, "but I'm not surprised anymore." Sometimes the hardest part wasn't the sacrifice, it was the silence. The way no one checked in. No call from my mom asking if I needed help. No offer from my dad to walk me through budgets or decisions. They didn't even ask how things were going. It was like my wedding didn't exist. Like I didn't exist. Like I'd chosen to be invisible by not being their favorite. I worked weekends. I sold some jewelry. I gave up my savings for a honeymoon so we could afford a decent venue. Daniel offered again to help cover everything, but I shook my head. "Let me do this," I said. "I need to." There were moments I cried in the bathroom between shifts, wondering if any of this was worth it. But then I'd wipe my tears, take a deep breath, and remember, I wasn't doing this to prove anything to them anymore. I was doing it to honor myself, to build a celebration that reflected my strength, not their absence. Some days, the weight of that reality felt like too much, but I carried it anyway, quietly, proudly, because even though I was walking the hardest road alone, I knew where it was leading, and it wasn't back to them. Every bride dreams of planning her wedding surrounded by loved ones, laughter echoing through fitting rooms, advice exchanged over coffee, warm hands helping fold invitation cards late at night. I had none of that. Instead, I had checklists taped to my fridge, invoices tucked into a worn-out binder, and a tight chest every time I checked my bank balance. My weekends were spent scouting venues alone. When I tried on dresses, I had to ask a store assistant to zip me up. She smiled kindly, probably wondering why the bride had no entourage. I told her I liked it quiet, but the lie tasted bitter in my mouth. I sent out formal invitations, beautiful cream cards with gold lettering. I took my time writing out the ones for my parents and Maya. I didn't want them to think I forgot. I wanted them to know I remembered everything, even though they hadn't lifted a finger. When the RSVP date passed, my inbox had silence from their side. No enthusiastic text from my mom saying, "Can't wait." No emoji-filled reply from Maya. Just nothing. I called once, just to confirm they'd received them. My mom picked up, let out a light chuckle, and said, "Oh yes, we got them. We'll see what our schedule looks like." No warmth. No congratulations. Just polite dismissal. Like my wedding was some casual event that might make their calendar if they had a free afternoon. I hung up without pushing. That was the last time I reached out about it. The old me, the girl who used to beg for their attention, might have called again. Might have asked if they wanted to help pick the flowers or come to the final dress fitting. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was tired of proving my worth to people who had already made up their minds. Daniel noticed. "They don't deserve a seat," he said one night as we worked on the seating chart. I smiled at him. "They'll get one, but I won't leave any space in my heart waiting for them to fill it." Every other chair on that list had a name that mattered. Friends who'd helped me clean up after late shifts, coworkers who cheered me on, Daniel's family who offered more kindness in a few months than mine had in years. My wedding was no longer about showing them I was enough. It was about surrounding myself with people who already believed I was. And whether my family came or not didn't matter anymore, because I had finally stopped waiting for their applause. The sun rose gently on my wedding day, casting golden light over the soft ivory curtains and delicate pink flowers lacing the venue. Everything was in place. The string quartet tuning their instruments, the scent of jasmine from centerpieces I chose myself, the quiet hum of guests arriving dressed in their finest. But something else hung in the air too. Anticipation, not just for the vows or the cake, but for a truth that was about to unfold. I stood in the bridal suite, veil pinned, lipstick fresh, heart steady. I looked at my reflection, not the tired girl who once cried over being forgotten, but a woman who built every inch of this day from the ground up. There was no resentment in my heart now, just a readiness to let the moment speak for itself. When my parents arrived, they were late, of course. My mother wore a crisp silk sari, and my father walked with his usual stiff pride. Maya wasn't with them. They glanced around with puzzled expressions. "Where's the other car?" I heard my mother ask the event coordinator. "We're waiting for Maya and her husband." The coordinator blinked. "Ma'am, there's only one bride today." Silence. Confusion flickered on their faces. My father's brow furrowed. My mother's lips parted slightly as if to protest, but then she saw it, the sign at the entrance. "Welcome to the wedding of Daniel and Layla." No mention of Maya. No shared spotlight. Just me. They stepped into the hall, slow and disoriented, scanning the elegant setup they never helped create. The seats filled with people they didn't know, my people. The friends who carried me emotionally. The colleagues who supported me. Daniel's parents who smiled at them politely with warmth they didn't return. Then their eyes landed on the front row. 2 seats marked, reserved for bride's parents. Still empty. I watched them from a distance. They hesitated. Maybe they expected me to run over, to greet them, to plead for them to stay. But I didn't move. I just smiled softly, turned toward the aisle, and nodded to the music coordinator. As the wedding march began, and I stepped out, arm in arm with Daniel, every eye turned to me. And that's when the realization fully struck them, this wasn't Maya's day. It wasn't theirs to oversee or take credit for. It was mine. For the first time in my life, they weren't the center of the room. I was, and their seats stayed empty. It wasn't just their silence that filled those empty seats. It was the weight of a truth they hadn't yet discovered. A truth I had carried quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to let it breathe. Maya wasn't just absent because it was my day. She was absent because she couldn't show her face. Her picture-perfect marriage? Cracked. Shattered. Gone. They didn't know. My parents, who had paraded her wedding like a royal coronation, had no clue that less than a year in, Maya and her husband had separated. No dramatic breakup, no explosive fight. Just distance, disappointment, and silence that turned into finality. I had found out months ago, through a mutual friend who couldn't hide the shock when she bumped into Maya alone, moving into a small apartment across town. But I never told them. Let them believe their golden daughter was still shining. Let them hang their hopes on an image she could no longer maintain. They had built her pedestal so high, they never noticed it was hollow underneath. Maya had begged me not to tell them. "They'll be devastated," she had whispered during one of the rare calls we had. Her voice was strained, small. "I just need time. Please don't say anything yet." And I hadn't. Not out of kindness. Not out of loyalty. But because some truths are more powerful when they reveal themselves naturally. Like wine spilled on a white dress. It stains deeper when it's unexpected. So as I stood under the soft lights of my own reception, smiling in a sea of real love and earned celebration, I knew Maya was miles away, curled up somewhere, hiding from the eyes that once adored her. And my parents, still blissfully unaware, sipping juice, offering tight smiles to strangers, waiting for the moment Maya would make her grand entrance. It never came. I saw my mother checking her phone again and again. My father whispered to her, confusion growing. They had expected Maya to walk in with her husband, to share the spotlight, to once again upstage me without even trying. But the evening passed. Speech after speech. Dance after dance. Toasts filled with laughter and tears from people who knew my journey. And not a single word about Maya. My mother finally leaned toward me during dinner, forcing a smile. "Sweetheart, is Maya all right?" She didn't text or call. We thought she'd at least show up with, well, her husband. I sipped my drink slowly, then looked her in the eye. "I'm not sure," I said, voice even. "We haven't spoken much lately." I saw it, just a flicker of fear. That tightening in her chest. That uneasy feeling a parent gets when their golden child goes quiet for too long. But I said no more, because this night wasn't about Maya. It wasn't about secrets or shame or saving anyone's pride. It was about me finally seen, finally celebrated, finally standing in the light I created for myself. And as I raised my glass to Daniel, to love, to all the people who lifted me when my own family looked away, I silently toasted Maya too, not out of pity, but because sometimes the loudest revenge is a quiet success, and sometimes the loudest failure is silence. They sat there, stiff-backed and smiling through tight lips, surrounded by unfamiliar faces who toasted to a daughter they barely knew. Every detail of the evening was stunning, elegant yet deeply personal. Handwritten thank you notes at every table, a playlist of songs that carried meaning. Speeches that spoke of hard work, resilience, and a woman who had lifted herself by the roots while others stood by and watched. I watched my parents closely. My mother's eyes kept scanning the room, looking for a face she now knew wouldn't appear. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the linen napkin in her lap, lips pursed so tightly they turned white. My father, normally composed, looked smaller somehow, as if the tuxedo that once made him feel important now didn't quite fit. And still I said nothing. I had given them no special role in the ceremony, no walk down the aisle, no front row seat, just standard guest seating, next to an accountant I once worked with and his cheerful wife. And yet that placement said everything I needed to say. I was no longer the daughter waiting to be seen. I was the woman who had stopped asking. It was during the maid of honor speech that something shifted. Anna, my best friend since college, stood up with a glass of champagne and a voice full of emotion. She spoke not just about love, but about the years she watched me work, scrape, and sacrifice, about the late nights, the missed vacations, the way I quietly saved for my dream wedding while carrying everyone else's silence on my back. I've seen her build something beautiful, Anna said, her voice steady, not just in this room tonight, but in her life. And she did it without anyone handing her anything. She did it alone. And now she's never alone again. The applause was thunderous, and I saw it, my father's hand slowly curling into a fist in his lap, my mother's jaw tightening. Their eyes no longer darted around in search of Maya. Instead, they were fixed on me, really looking at me, maybe for the first time. They weren't proud. Not yet. First came confusion, then realization, and finally guilt. But I didn't offer them warm smiles or waiting arms. I gave them what they had given me for years, polite distance, a nod when our eyes met, a soft thank you for coming when they approached. Nothing more, because this wasn't their victory. It wasn't even their redemption. It was my boundary. Later, as guests laughed and danced around them, I caught sight of my mother whispering something to my father. His expression turned solemn, then ashamed. It was the look of someone who had just stumbled into a mirror and didn't like the reflection. They had raised 2 daughters, but only invested in one. The one who smiled on magazine covers, who wore designer shoes and gave them Instagram-worthy moments. But tonight, it was the other daughter, the quiet one, the smart one, the one they told to earn her way, who had created something unforgettable. Not just a wedding, but a world. A life filled with people who showed up for her, not out of obligation, but out of love. And as they watched me move through that world with calm confidence, they realized something that would haunt them for a long time. They had given everything to the wrong child, and I had turned their rejection into a foundation they could never claim credit for. The music swelled as the lights dimmed to a warm, golden hue. Laughter floated in the air, blending with clinking glasses and the rhythm of celebration. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching the world I had built, piece by piece, choice by choice, move and glow around me. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a beginning. And more than that, it was proof. I didn't need their approval anymore. I never truly did. What I needed was what I found along the way, myself. My husband reached for my hand. His smile was steady, warm, and full of pride. Not because of how I looked tonight or the elegance of the hall, but because he knew what it had taken to get here. He had seen the nights I sat in silence calculating budgets, the mornings I swallowed tears to face work with a smile, and the moments when I fought back out alone because there was no one else to hold the line with me. And now I wasn't alone anymore. He led me onto the floor as the band began to play our song, soft, timeless, and full of soul. Guests gathered around, forming a circle of warmth and admiration. My best friend stood clapping, my coworkers smiling through tears, and even my old neighbor who used to bring me hot soup when I was too busy to cook. These people didn't share my blood, but they showed up for me in ways my family never had. As we danced, I caught a glimpse of my parents in the corner. They weren't clapping. They weren't smiling. They were watching. Watching a daughter they had underestimated take the spotlight, not because someone handed it to her, but because she built the stage herself. I didn't need them to feel shame or regret. That part no longer belonged to me. I had spent too many years carrying their choices like a second skin. Tonight, I finally shed it. The applause grew as we twirled and laughed, and in that moment, time seemed to slow. Everything felt lighter. The tension, the hurt, the silent questions, they all drifted away. I had arrived, not at the end of a journey, but at the start of a new one. One where I didn't beg for love. One where I didn't shrink myself for comfort or chase validation in tight smiles and shallow praise. I was enough. I am enough. And no seat they chose to take or not take could rewrite that truth. After the final note, I hugged my friends. I thanked the caterers. I took photos, toasted, and felt the fullness of joy I had carved with my own hands. Later that night, as the crowd began to thin and the stars blinked outside the tall glass windows, I stepped out for a breath of fresh air. My dress flowed behind me, and my heels clicked softly on the stone path outside the hall. My husband joined me, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You did it," he whispered. I smiled and leaned into him. "No," I said softly, "we did it." And then, as if speaking not just to him, but to every version of myself that ever felt small or unseen, I whispered into the night. I wasn't born their favorite, but I became my own. Because at the end of the day, the truest love, the kind that anchors you through storms and lifts you when no one claps, is the love you give yourself when no one else does. And that was the real celebration. The last dance wasn't just a moment on a floor. It was a declaration of survival, of strength, of self-worth. And the woman who once stood in the shadow of her sister's spotlight, she became the light,